Santa Fe Pro Musica brings the Dover String Quartet to the Lensic this Sunday. The New Yorker writes, few young American ensembles are as exciting and accomplished as the Dover Quartet. They're on the faculty at the Curtis Institute of Music and are the Penelope P. Watkins Ensemble in Residence, and cellist Camden Shaw joins me today. Welcome, Camden.
Thanks so much for having me.
On the program, two American composers, Mason Bates and George Walker, and the Czech composer Antonin Dvorak. Mason Bates is a living composer, and this piece was composed for your group. How important is it to perform new works?
Oh my goodness, really, really important. I mean, this lineage of great quartet writing, of course, now goes all the way back to Haydn, but needs to be nourished continually. And composers today have a lot of mediums from which to choose. And actually, Mason is a really cool example because he composes in so many different ways, so many different mediums, including electronic music and a lot of symphonic music and a lot of synthesis between the two of those worlds. But he has only written, as far as I know, 2 quartets, and this is one of them. So it's really a responsibility, I think, of quartet players, if we're focusing on this microcosm within music, to continue that relationship between quartet playing and great composers. And it's absolutely been a joy to work with Mason now in a couple projects.
The piece is the Suite for String Quartet. Does he break any new ground, any innovations in this piece?
In a way, certainly. I think one of the things that Mason does so well is to sort of defy genre and even really defy any attempt to describe him in one way or that he has X style. Between his pieces, there's such variety and such a sense of freshness to each work that he really resists being simplified that way, reduced, if you will. And I really like that. So this is a really, really interesting work in that it actually pays homage to some very, very familiar American folk themes. The last movement is actually based on Shenandoah, and there are references to Copeland in the first movement, some fiddle style playing in the first violin. So this piece has very, very original harmonies and is certainly instantly recognizable as being fresh again. So yeah, I think there's always something new and exciting about his music, and I love the quartet. It's very beautiful.
You're playing a piece by George Walker, who shares an affinity with you. He was also a graduate of the Curtis Institute, in fact, the first Black graduate of Curtis Institute, and later a Pulitzer Prize winner. He graduated in 1945. He wrote this quartet a year later. How would you describe this mid-20th century work?
It's absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, especially the slow movement, which is the most often performed movement from this quartet. And one thing that I think audiences will notice, even if they're not so familiar with George Walker's style and work, is that there really was a very special American ultra-romanticism that was happening during that time. And American composers were using this really interesting combination of very, very lush consonant melodies with just sort of dissonances that weren't expected to resolve. It was a very special period for American composition, I think. A lot of lush writing, and again, a lot of pretty jagged dissonances and rhythmic motives as well. So Walker's a very challenging quartet. And for that reason, I think the first and third movements are often not played, and the Adagio is played more often. But it's really effective. We actually just had our first performance of it for the season a few days ago, and audiences really responded to it. So that was cool to see.
So I think maybe then there's a connection between sort of the Americanism, the style that Walker was composing in, and the final composer on the program, Antonin Dvorak. He was specifically commissioned for this quartet and asked to write something Slavonic because his works, the Slavonic dances, were so famous at that point. So what specifically is Slavonic in this piece?
Oh, gosh. Well, that's a great question. And I'll admit some of my ignorance here, being more interpreter than music historian. But to me, I can give you my reaction to it. There's a style in Dvorak, and most of it is rhythmic, that has to do with a certain freedom and a way of bending rhythm that's actually not that unlike what we hear about in jazz, about like rhythm being swung, for instance. And the more Bohemian or the more Slavonic, I guess you could say, that he got in his music, the more those elements, I think, show themselves. This quartet is really deeply rooted in folk themes and has a Dumka movement, which, of course, a lot of his chamber music did. But I think for me, it's the rhythmic style that betrays just how folksy it is.
Camden Shaw is cellist with the Dover String Quartet. playing music of Mason Bates, George Walker, and Antonin Dvorak this Sunday, 3 p.m. at the Lensic. It's a presentation of Santa Fe Pro Musica, and it also happens to be in the opening weekend of the inaugural Art and Soul Winter Festival. Tickets and more information at sfpromusica.org. Camden Shaw, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.